Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story so wild, so mind-boggling, that you'll have trouble even comprehending it. Imagine a man so rich that his wealth, even in today's terms, would still make billionaires squirm. His name? Mansa Musa. You've probably heard of him or maybe you haven't, but either way tonight you're in for a treat. Now let's paint the picture. You're standing in the midst of the bustling, vibrant, golden city of Timbuktu, in the heart of the Mali Empire. The air smells of spice and wealth, and the streets are filled with scholars, traders, and people from all corners of the earth. You glance around and you can't help but notice the heavy gold ornaments everyone wears, because in this empire, gold isn't just a luxury, it's a lifestyle. But let's hit the brakes for a second. You're probably thinking, wait, how can one man be that rich? Well, buckle up because Mansa Musa was, without a doubt, the richest man in history. And it wasn't just a brief moment of fortune. This guy was the epitome of wealth for his entire lifetime. If there's anyone who could make Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk look like amateurs, it's Mansa Musa. But how did he get there? And why do we still talk about him today? You'll see soon enough. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location in the comments and tell me the time of day where you're at. It's always fun to know where my viewers are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Mansa Musa wasn't just a lucky guy born into wealth. His rise was strategic and shaped by the tides of history. Born in 1280, he became the 10th emperor of the Mali Empire in 1312. The Mali Empire, at the time, was already a powerhouse, sitting in the heart of West Africa, with access to some of the richest gold deposits on the planet. But Mansa Musa had something more than just gold. He had vision. Mali's gold reserves were huge, so huge in fact that they were the lifeblood of the entire empire. Gold was the empire's currency, its trade lifeblood, and its symbol of prosperity. But Musa's real genius wasn't in controlling the gold. No, it was in how he utilized it. Mansa Musa understood something crucial. The key to securing your empire isn't just controlling resources, it's controlling how others perceive your empire. And that's where Mansa Musa's legendary journey to Mecca comes in. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's talk about the incredible wealth that Mansa Musa inherited. You might have a sense of how much wealth that would have been, but try to think about it in modern terms. To put it in perspective, the wealth of the Mali Empire at the time would have dwarfed even the richest people of today. Historians often struggle to even come close to a number that makes sense because of how vast his resources were. But one of the things that makes Mansa Musa's wealth truly mind-blowing is how he spent it. In a world where wealth is often hoarded, Musa was different. His generosity was unparalleled, and his willingness to spend on a scale never before seen was what cemented his place in history. The year was 1324. Mansa Musa, already ruling a kingdom of extraordinary wealth, embarked on what would become the most famous pilgrimage in history, the Hajj to Mecca. Now imagine the scene. A vast caravan snaking its way through the desert, stretching for miles. Camels, horses, and thousands of attendants, all marching with one goal in mind: Mecca, the holy city of Islam. You're one of the onlookers, and as you squint into the distance, you see it: gold. Gold everywhere. Not just in Mansa Musa's hands but in the very air around him. Gold dust shimmering in the sunlight. His retinue was so immense that, in some places, it seemed to swallow the landscape. Historians still argue about the exact numbers of this caravan, but most estimates range from 60,000 to a staggering 100,000 people. Thousands of soldiers, civilians, traders, and slaves, all journeying together, and each of them, it seemed, carried some form of wealth, be it gold, ivory, or precious goods. But it wasn't just the people who amazed the world, it was the sheer amount of gold that was spread around. Musa's caravan carried with it more than 12 tons of gold. Yes, 12 tons. And this gold wasn't just for show. Mansa Musa was known for his generosity, and on his journey he gave away gold to everyone he encountered. The poor, the scholars, the merchants, even the locals who lived along the trade routes. Mansa Musa's generosity didn't stop there. He famously gave gold to the Sultan of Cairo, who was so awestruck by the sheer quantity of it that he couldn't believe his eyes. But the repercussions of Mansa Musa's display were felt far beyond Cairo. As Musa passed through Egypt, he began to flood the economy with his gold. The value of gold in Egypt plummeted. What's more, his actions caused a ripple effect that reached all the way to Europe. For years, the price of gold fluctuated wildly in the Mediterranean, and merchants in North Africa, Europe, and the Middle East had to readjust their trade practices. Now let's pause for a moment and picture this. Mansa Musa, the king, was walking through some of the most powerful cities of the time, his eyes glinting with the pride of a man who knew he was shaping history. You're in awe of his presence. But also, somewhere deep inside you're thinking, how much more gold can one man possibly have? The answer, a lot. You'd be surprised just how much. While some of the stories of his wealth are exaggerated, his actions did leave a lasting mark, changing the way people thought about power, wealth, and generosity. Historians still debate whether Mansa Musa's pilgrimage was more of a political statement or an act of pure devotion. Some say it was about showcasing his wealth, while others suggest that it was a genuine religious pilgrimage. What's beyond debate is that it was one of the most grandiose public displays of wealth the world had ever seen, and the effects rippled across continents. As Musa made his way to Mecca, he didn't just bring wealth. He also brought the prestige of the Mali Empire. Word of his enormous fortune and generosity spread far and wide, and soon enough, the cities of North Africa were buzzing with talk of the man who could flood an economy with gold. In the wake of his journey, Mali's place in the world as a center of culture, wealth, and influence was solidified. The very idea of Mali, and by extension Mansa Musa, was now tied to opulence and power. But all this gold wasn't without its consequences. The disruption in Egypt was only the beginning. The flow of gold that Mansa Musa injected into the world economy would eventually have profound and long-lasting effects, and some say, even played a role in reshaping global trade for centuries to come. Now that Mansa Musa had captured the attention of the world, his empire was poised for an even more extraordinary transformation. This wasn't just a man with an abundance of gold. Mansa Musa was a ruler with vision, a leader who knew how to parlay his wealth into lasting legacy. After completing his pilgrimage to Mecca, Musa returned to Mali, but he didn't just go back to ruling as he had before. No, he went back to reshape the cultural and intellectual heart of his empire. His most significant move? The establishment of one of the most renowned centers of learning in the world, the legendary city of Timbuktu. Historians often debate the exact timeline of the creation of Timbuktu's famous universities and mosques, but one thing is clear. Mansa Musa's wealth, bolstered by his successful trade routes and vast resources, fueled a massive building boom. His empire became the academic and cultural powerhouse of Africa. The University of Sankore, one of the most famous centers of learning in the medieval world, flourished under Mansa Musa's reign. Scholars, philosophers, mathematicians, and poets traveled from all over the Islamic world to study in Timbuktu, where the pursuit of knowledge was as valuable as the gold that funded it. Mansa Musa's commitment to education wasn't just a matter of funding. It was a commitment to creating a lasting legacy for the empire and the world. His scholars preserved and created important texts in fields ranging from astronomy to medicine, law, and poetry. Musa was a patron of knowledge in a way that few rulers had ever been, and the intellectual culture he helped foster turned Timbuktu into a beacon of enlightenment in the Middle Ages. Historians still marvel at the libraries of Timbuktu, which even today, are considered some of the richest collections of medieval African manuscripts. But the story doesn't stop there. Along with his support for learning, Mansa Musa also invested heavily in the arts, creating a blend of Islamic and African cultural practices that left an indelible mark on the empire. His court became a hub for poets, artists, and musicians. The art produced under Musa's reign reflected a mix of Islamic influence and the rich traditions of Mali, blending calligraphy, geometric designs, and African motifs into vibrant works that still echo today. But what about the effects of all this wealth on the daily lives of the people? Was there a trickle-down effect? It's hard to say. Some historians argue that Mansa Musa's focus on public works, mosques, schools, and roads, made life easier for his subjects. The vast wealth of the empire allowed for the construction of infrastructure that supported trade, travel, and communication, which in turn improved the lives of the people of Mali. However, others believe that the concentration of wealth in the hands of the emperor and his court may have resulted in a disparity between the elite and the common folk. Despite this, it's clear that the legacy of Mansa Musa's reign was one of prosperity and cultural flourishing for the people of Mali. The Mali Empire, under Mansa Musa's rule, stood as a shining example of what a well-governed, wealthy, and educated society could achieve. Timbuktu, along with other cities like Gao and Jen, became vibrant centers of trade, learning, and culture. Mansa Musa wasn't just a king, he was a cultural and intellectual architect, building a legacy that would endure for centuries. And as much as we tend to remember him for his gold, it was the ideas and culture he fostered that truly shaped the future of West Africa and beyond. Yet, despite all his wealth and accomplishments, Mansa Musa was not immune to the forces of time. The Mali Empire, for all its splendor, faced challenges that even the mightiest ruler could not overcome. The balance of power in the region began to shift, and with it came new obstacles that would test Mansa Musa's leadership in ways he hadn't anticipated. Historians still debate whether the lavish spending and grand displays of wealth during Mansa Musa's reign ultimately contributed to the eventual decline of the empire. Some argue that his generosity and the subsequent inflation of gold devalued the currency and created economic instability. Others believe that it was the increasing pressure from external forces, including invaders from the north and the rise of neighboring empires, that brought about the end of Mali's golden age. Whatever the case may be, Mansa Musa's legacy, built on gold, intellect, and a commitment to culture, left an indelible mark on history. Today, historians and scholars continue to study his reign, and his story serves as a reminder of the power of leadership and vision, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. As we move forward in Mansa Musa's story, it's important to step back for a moment and think about the true magnitude of his achievements. We've talked about the gold, the pilgrimage, and the intellectual flourishing under his reign. But what truly set Mansa Musa apart from many other rulers wasn't just his wealth, it was his ability to use that wealth to build something enduring. While many rulers before him had hoarded their riches or spent them on personal luxuries, Musa seemed determined to invest in his empire's future. One of the most remarkable facets of Mansa Musa's rule was his ability to leverage his wealth for diplomatic influence. When he returned from his pilgrimage to Mecca, he didn't just go back to his palace and rest on his laurels. He used his immense wealth to strengthen his diplomatic ties with other powerful empires and kingdoms. The most notable of these alliances was his relationship with the Mamluks of Egypt. The Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir was so impressed by Musa's generosity and wealth that he invited him to Cairo for a grand celebration. Musa's response? He sent the Sultan 300 slaves, each carrying a golden staff. This gesture not only cemented his relationship with the Mamluks but also showcased his status as a ruler who could bring both wealth and power to his allies. But there was more to Mansa Musa's diplomacy than just gold. As the Mali Empire grew wealthier, it also became a more attractive partner in international trade. The empire was strategically located along the trans-Saharan trade routes, connecting the Mediterranean world with the wealth of sub-Saharan Africa. Mansa Musa capitalized on this, ensuring that Mali remained a vital player in global commerce. By opening trade routes and fostering a system of communication between his empire and the broader Islamic world, Musa established Mali as an economic powerhouse that rivaled the great empires of the time. Still, even with all this influence, Mansa Musa's reign wasn't without its challenges. While his diplomatic ties flourished, his empire was not immune to internal strife. Some historians suggest that the massive wealth and rapid expansion of the empire led to instability. The large influx of gold, while boosting the empire's prestige, also contributed to inflation in the region, devaluing the currency and causing economic ripples that would last for generations. Despite these challenges, Mansa Musa continued to rule with a steady hand, always looking for ways to preserve the integrity and power of the Mali Empire. In fact, one of the defining characteristics of Musa's reign was his commitment to maintaining the strength of his empire. He wasn't just interested in making his name known, he wanted to secure Mali's future. To that end, Musa invested heavily in infrastructure and public works. Roads were built, bridges were constructed, and irrigation systems were developed to support the agricultural economy. The expansion of these projects not only improved the lives of Mali's citizens but also made the empire more resilient in the face of external threats. Yet, for all of Mansa Musa's achievements, there was one factor that no amount of gold could control: time. As the years passed, the vast empire that Mansa Musa had built began to show signs of weakness. His death in 1337 marked the beginning of a slow decline for the Mali Empire, and it wasn't long before internal conflicts, external invasions, and the disintegration of the trade networks that had once fueled the empire's prosperity led to its downfall. Historians still debate what exactly caused the empire's collapse, but many point to the heavy reliance on gold and the instability created by such wealth. What was once a thriving center of commerce and culture gradually fell into disrepair. Despite the decline of the empire, Mansa Musa's legacy remained strong. His name continued to be spoken of in awe, not only in West Africa but throughout the Islamic world and Europe. The gold, the grand pilgrimage, the intellectual hub of Timbuktu. These things lived on in the stories told about him. Even as Mali weakened, the memory of Mansa Musa's rule remained a symbol of wealth, power, and vision. Historians today still wonder, could Mansa Musa have done more to secure his empire's future? Some argue that the heavy focus on gold and extravagant displays of wealth made his rule unsustainable. Others believe that the empire's downfall was inevitable due to the internal pressures of ruling such a vast and diverse territory. Either way, Mansa Musa's reign remains one of the most extraordinary stories in history, not just because of his wealth, but because of the way he used that wealth to shape the world around him. As we consider the last days of the Mali Empire, it's worth noting that Mansa Musa's story is more than just a tale of riches. It's a story of ambition, vision, and the sometimes fragile nature of power. The rise and fall of Mali and Mansa Musa's central role in that history is a reminder that even the greatest empires are subject to the forces of time, change, and circumstance. As Mansa Musa's empire entered the slow decline that would eventually see the Mali Empire crumble, the world around him was changing as well. The arrival of new empires, changes in global trade routes, and the rise of external threats contributed to the unraveling of what had been one of the most prosperous empires in African history. Despite this, Mansa Musa's death in 1337 marked the end of a golden age, but his legacy would not fade easily. Let's shift our focus for a moment to look at how his successors fared after his passing. Mansa Musa left behind an empire that was rich in culture, wealth, and intellectual achievement, but it was also an empire that relied heavily on its trade in gold. While this was a source of immense wealth during his reign, it became both a blessing and a curse after his death. His successors, who were not always as powerful or as wise as he was, struggled to maintain the same level of influence and control. The gold that had once flowed freely from Mali's abundant mines became a source of tension, both within the empire and between neighboring states. Historians still argue about the role of Mansa Musa's heirs in the empire's decline. Some believe that the wealth left behind by Musa was too tempting for the kingdom's rulers to manage effectively. Others argue that the empire suffered from poor leadership and internal divisions, which made it vulnerable to outside forces. While the Mali Empire did hold on for several decades after Mansa Musa's death, it was never quite the same. The disruption of trade routes, the rise of new political powers in the region, and the slow erosion of Mali's once unbeatable power contributed to its eventual fall. But what about the rest of the world? How did Mansa Musa's empire affect the broader international landscape? As we've seen, his wealth and power had a profound impact on global trade, especially in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. When Musa made his pilgrimage to Mecca, he not only disrupted the economies of North Africa but also made the West aware of Mali's immense wealth. In the years following his reign, many European powers began to take a greater interest in the African continent, setting the stage for later colonialism. Though the Mali Empire eventually fell, its influence continued to echo throughout history, inspiring future generations. The impact of Mansa Musa's reign wasn't limited to the immediate world around him. His pilgrimage and the wealth of Mali were the stuff of legends, passed down through generations of storytellers, historians, and scholars. In fact, Mansa Musa became a symbol, a mythic figure of wealth, piety, and power. Even after Mali's decline, the legend of Mansa Musa lived on, inspiring poets, artists, and scholars alike. His journey to Mecca was immortalized in countless works of art, and his legacy was preserved through oral history, ensuring that his name would never be forgotten. Despite the fall of the empire he had built, Mansa Musa's story remains an essential part of world history. The way he used his wealth to invest in education, architecture, and trade created a lasting legacy that influenced not only West Africa but the broader world. His legacy lived on not just in the gold he left behind, but in the cultural and intellectual accomplishments that still resonate today. The libraries of Timbuktu, the mosques, and the universities that flourished under his rule stand as testament to his vision and commitment to learning. Still, the fall of the Mali Empire raises an important question. Could Mansa Musa have done more to secure the long-term stability of his empire? Could he have prepared his successors to handle the vast wealth and responsibility that came with ruling such a prosperous kingdom? Some historians argue that Mansa Musa's focus on public works and his heavy reliance on trade made the empire vulnerable to collapse. Others believe that the decline was inevitable, given the complexities of ruling a vast empire in a world that was rapidly changing. What remains clear, however, is that Mansa Musa's story is one of contrasts: wealth and generosity, vision and vulnerability. His reign serves as both a cautionary tale and an inspiring example. The riches he amassed were extraordinary, but it was his foresight in building intellectual and cultural institutions that truly set him apart from other rulers of his time. Mali, under Mansa Musa's rule, became more than just a land of gold. It became a symbol of intellectual pursuit, cultural exchange, and the heights that human achievement could reach. Mansa Musa's reign may have ended with the decline of the Mali Empire, but his legacy continues to inspire people today. From the artists who depict his life to the historians who study his reign, Mansa Musa remains a figure who challenges our perceptions of wealth, leadership, and legacy. As we reflect on his life, it's clear that his story is not just one of gold and riches. It's a story of ambition, wisdom, and the complex dynamics of power. Now, let's slow down for a moment and reflect on one of the more fascinating elements of Mansa Musa's legacy: his relationship with the Islamic world. Mansa Musa wasn't just a wealthy king, he was also a devout Muslim, and his deep commitment to Islam profoundly influenced his rule and the cultural landscape of the Mali Empire. As we saw earlier, his pilgrimage to Mecca wasn't just a religious journey, it was a grand political and economic statement. But beyond the gold and grandeur, this journey symbolized his deep spiritual devotion and the desire to align Mali with the broader Islamic world. Historians still argue about the extent of Mansa Musa's religious devotion. Some scholars suggest that he genuinely sought to strengthen Mali's ties with the Islamic world, while others point out that his displays of wealth were more about consolidating power and prestige. One thing is for sure: his pilgrimage had lasting effects on the relationship between Mali and the Islamic states of North Africa and the Middle East. His generosity during the pilgrimage earned him the admiration of many, and Mali's reputation as a land of wealth and piety spread far and wide. This connection to Islam didn't just affect Mali's diplomatic relations, it also influenced the internal development of the empire. Mansa Musa's reign saw the introduction of many Islamic cultural practices and beliefs into daily life. Islamic law, for example, began to influence governance, with more Muslim scholars and advisors taking prominent positions in the empire's court. Furthermore, the empire saw a significant increase in Islamic architecture. Mosques, madrasas, schools, and other buildings that reflected the fusion of African and Islamic architectural styles. The most famous example of this is the Great Mosque of Jen, one of the most impressive and iconic structures in West Africa, which was funded and constructed during Musa's reign. But there's an interesting twist here. While Mansa Musa's devotion to Islam is widely recognized, some historians suggest that his approach was more pragmatic than purely religious. By adopting Islam as the official religion of his empire, Mansa Musa could strengthen his ties with the powerful Muslim states of North Africa and the Middle East. It was a smart move, given the rising prominence of Islam in the region, and it helped secure trade routes, alliances, and access to knowledge that would later propel the empire to even greater heights. Still, whether his actions were motivated by genuine faith or political calculation remains a topic of debate among historians. Beyond the political and cultural implications, Mansa Musa's embrace of Islam also had a lasting impact on the intellectual landscape of the empire. The spread of Islam brought with it a wealth of knowledge, including advancements in science, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. This influx of knowledge, combined with the gold and resources at his disposal, created an environment where intellectual and artistic achievements could flourish. The scholars who flocked to Mali from across the Muslim world played a key role in transforming the empire into one of the most advanced civilizations of its time. As we dive deeper into the intellectual achievements of Mansa Musa's reign, we come to the heart of one of his greatest legacies, the city of Timbuktu. Today, Timbuktu is a symbol of intellectual and cultural achievement, but it wasn't always that way. Under Mansa Musa, however, the city became a thriving center of learning and scholarship. Libraries filled with ancient manuscripts, schools of mathematics and astronomy, and vibrant debates on the nature of the universe were commonplace in Timbuktu. Scholars from all over the Islamic world made the long journey to study in the city, and many of them produced works that would influence generations of thinkers and leaders. The legacy of Timbuktu goes far beyond its status as a center of education. The city also became a hub for trade, culture, and religion, attracting merchants, artists, and religious leaders from across the Muslim world. This combination of intellectual and cultural activity made Timbuktu one of the most cosmopolitan cities of its time. Mansa Musa's patronage of this intellectual flourishing ensured that his empire would not only be remembered for its wealth but also for its contributions to the world of knowledge. Despite the grandeur of Timbuktu, however, Mansa Musa's focus on wealth and the patronage of the arts didn't come without its challenges. As the empire's riches grew, so too did the complexities of maintaining such a vast and diverse kingdom. The wealth that had propelled Mali to greatness also created internal tensions. The concentration of wealth in the hands of the elite, combined with the growing disparity between the upper classes and the common people, eventually led to political instability. Furthermore, as trade routes shifted and external pressures mounted, it became increasingly difficult for Mansa Musa's successors to maintain the empire's former glory. Mansa Musa's death in 1337 marked the beginning of the slow decline of the Mali Empire. However, his legacy lived on for generations. The intellectual and cultural foundations he laid down in Mali, particularly in Timbuktu, continued to inspire scholars, traders, and leaders for centuries. His wealth, generosity, and devotion to Islam were remembered as defining features of his reign. Yet, as we reflect on his reign, we must acknowledge that wealth alone was not enough to secure the future of his empire. In the end, it was a combination of leadership, vision, and external factors that determined the fate of the Mali Empire. As the years passed after Mansa Musa's death, the echoes of his reign began to fade, and the Mali Empire started to experience cracks in its once impervious armor. The empire that had been the wealthiest and most powerful in Africa began to lose its grip on its territories, and the golden age of Mali began to wither away. However, Mansa Musa's story, and the legend of his wealth and generosity, continued to captivate the imagination of people both within Africa and beyond. Let's take a step back for a moment and think about why Mansa Musa's empire eventually fell. Historians point to several key factors that contributed to the decline. The first, and perhaps most obvious, was the loss of central authority. After Musa's death, his heirs struggled to maintain the same level of control that he had. Mali was a vast empire with diverse cultures and peoples, and keeping it unified was no small feat. The leadership of the empire was fragmented, and local rulers began to assert more independence. Without a strong central figure like Mansa Musa, the empire struggled to stay united. Another key factor in the decline of Mali was the erosion of its economic foundation. As we've discussed earlier, Mansa Musa's wealth was largely derived from gold. While this was a source of immense power, it also made the empire highly vulnerable. The gold trade was essential to Mali's economy, and once the supply of gold began to diminish, the empire's wealth and influence were threatened. In addition, the disruption of trade routes due to external threats and changing political dynamics made it harder for Mali to maintain its prosperity. The gold that had once made the empire the envy of the world was no longer as plentiful, and the empire struggled to adjust. Mali also faced military challenges from neighboring kingdoms. The Songhai Empire, to the east, was a rising power and began to challenge Mali's dominance. The Songhai, under leaders like Sunni Ali and later Askia Muhammad, expanded their territory and power, eventually overtaking Mali's position as the dominant force in West Africa. Meanwhile, the Moroccan Empire to the north eyed the rich gold reserves of West Africa. In 1591, a Moroccan army, armed with firearms, invaded the Mali Empire and captured the great city of Timbuktu. This invasion dealt a heavy blow to Mali's power and prestige, marking the final chapter in the empire's decline. Despite the fall of the Mali Empire, Mansa Musa's influence did not disappear. His legacy lived on in the hearts and minds of people who had witnessed his grandeur and in the generations that followed. His reign was a model of what could be achieved through leadership, vision, and the strategic use of wealth. Even in the face of the empire's eventual decline, Mansa Musa remained a symbol of power and ambition. Mansa Musa's story also had a profound impact on the broader world. His pilgrimage to Mecca and his legendary display of wealth were known to people far beyond Africa. The stories of the Mali king's vast riches spread across the Mediterranean and into Europe, where they fueled the imaginations of traders, explorers, and adventurers. The gold that Musa had so freely given away in Cairo and other cities became the stuff of legend, and his name became synonymous with wealth. Even today, the story of Mansa Musa is a part of the cultural fabric of West Africa, where he is revered as a hero and a figure of mythic proportions. The lasting impact of Mansa Musa's reign is still felt today in many ways. The city of Timbuktu, once the intellectual heart of the Mali Empire, remains a symbol of Africa's rich history and cultural heritage. While the physical remnants of the empire may have faded, the cultural and intellectual contributions of Mansa Musa's reign continue to inspire scholars, historians, and artists around the world. His commitment to education, culture, and the pursuit of knowledge laid the groundwork for future generations of African intellectuals and thinkers. Historians, however, still wrestle with the question of whether Mansa Musa's wealth was ultimately a blessing or a curse. On the one hand, his incredible riches allowed him to build a powerful and prosperous empire that influenced the course of history. On the other hand, the very wealth that made him famous may have contributed to the instability and decline of the empire after his death. It is a paradox that remains at the heart of Mansa Musa's story. How can such immense wealth be both the source of success and the catalyst for downfall? Yet, as we reflect on the life of Mansa Musa, it becomes clear that his legacy is about more than just gold. It is about leadership, vision, and the ability to create lasting change. His story reminds us that wealth, while important, is only one part of what makes a ruler great. The true measure of greatness lies in how that wealth is used to uplift others, to foster culture and learning, and to build a legacy that endures long after the gold has run out. Mansa Musa, the richest man who ever lived, may have seen the fall of his empire, but his story continues to inspire, reminding us that the true value of wealth lies not in how much we have, but in how we use it to shape the world around us. As we continue to explore Mansa Musa's enduring legacy, it's important to take a moment to reflect on the broader impact of his reign. Despite the eventual decline of the Mali Empire, Mansa Musa's achievements resonate far beyond the confines of his kingdom. His reign exemplifies the power of visionary leadership and the extraordinary potential of a ruler who understands the value of wealth, not for personal indulgence, but for the transformation of an entire society. Mansa Musa's commitment to culture, education, and the arts helped elevate Mali to the status of one of the greatest empires in history. Timbuktu, once a dusty crossroads in the desert, flourished under Musa's patronage. It became not only a commercial hub but also a symbol of intellectual and cultural vitality. The libraries and universities that thrived under his rule were home to scholars from far and wide, preserving and advancing knowledge in fields such as astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. Timbuktu's influence wasn't just limited to West Africa. It became a beacon of learning for the broader Islamic world. One of the most lasting contributions of Mansa Musa's rule was the creation of a network of trade routes that spanned the vast expanse of Africa, linking Mali to the Mediterranean world and beyond. This network didn't just facilitate the exchange of goods, it also fostered the flow of ideas, religions, and technologies between Africa and Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The trans-Saharan trade routes, in particular, were vital in connecting West Africa to the broader global economy, allowing the Mali Empire to prosper for centuries. However, the empire's slow decline after Mansa Musa's death serves as a reminder of the fragility of power. Despite the impressive infrastructure and flourishing intellectual life Musa built, the wealth that was once so abundant couldn't shield the empire from the forces of time, external invasions, and internal discord. As neighboring empires like Songhai rose in prominence, the already fragmented Mali Empire found it difficult to maintain control over its vast territories. The decline was gradual but inevitable, a natural consequence of an empire that had stretched itself too thin. Mansa Musa's golden age eventually came to an end, but his impact on African history remained undeniable. The story of his reign transcended the borders of Mali, becoming a symbol of what was possible when wealth was used as a tool for cultural and intellectual advancement. While Mali may have weakened and eventually fell, the cultural and intellectual foundations that Musa had laid down continued to influence the course of history. It's worth noting that Mansa Musa's empire wasn't the only African kingdom to rise and fall during this period, but it was certainly one of the most remarkable. Empires such as Ghana, which had been a predecessor to Mali, and the Songhai Empire, which eventually supplanted it, all shared elements of Mansa Musa's grand vision: wealth derived from natural resources, sophisticated trade networks, and a strong commitment to the advancement of knowledge and culture. Yet even as these empires rose and fell, the memory of Mansa Musa's reign continued to shape the way future generations would think about leadership, wealth, and legacy. The mythology of Mansa Musa continued to grow even after his death. The story of his pilgrimage to Mecca, his displays of wealth, and his patronage of education were recounted across generations, becoming a part of the larger narrative of Africa's greatness. Even in the modern world, Mansa Musa's name remains synonymous with wealth and generosity. His pilgrimage to Mecca was the stuff of legend, and the very image of the Mali Empire during his reign became a symbol of prosperity and success. Yet, Mansa Musa's story also raises important questions about the nature of wealth and power. How much wealth is too much? What is the cost of such extraordinary riches? Could Mansa Musa have done more to preserve the stability of his empire? Historians still debate these questions, but one thing is clear: Mansa Musa's reign exemplifies the complexities of empire building and the balance of power. His immense wealth did not guarantee the survival of the Mali Empire, but it certainly ensured that his name would be remembered for centuries to come. In the end, Mansa Musa's legacy is a reminder that even the most prosperous empires are vulnerable to the forces of time, and that wealth, though powerful, is only one element of what makes an empire great. His reign was a moment of brilliance in African history, and even as the Mali Empire faded, the influence of his leadership continued to resonate across generations. As we move forward in Mansa Musa's story, let's take a moment to consider his reputation beyond the boundaries of Africa. Mansa Musa's reign, while centered in Mali, reached far beyond the deserts and savannas of West Africa. His wealth and opulence, especially after the pilgrimage to Mecca, became the subject of tales and myths that spread across the Islamic world and even into Europe. The great wealth of Mali was no longer just a regional secret, it had become global knowledge. In the Islamic world, Mansa Musa was seen as a model ruler. His generosity during the Hajj, his piety, and his commitment to advancing Islamic scholarship in his empire were celebrated. He wasn't just a king with gold, he was a king with purpose. His Islamic faith was integral to the development of his empire, but it was also part of a broader cultural movement. The Mali Empire under Mansa Musa became a beacon of learning, a place where scholars from across the Muslim world gathered, and where new ideas could flourish. Scholars in Timbuktu preserved ancient texts, wrote new works and exchanged knowledge with counterparts in the broader Islamic world. Mansa Musa's influence on the intellectual climate of West Africa was profound, making his empire a symbol of cultural exchange and intellectual flourishing. However, outside of the Islamic world in Europe and other regions, Mansa Musa's reign was often met with awe, mixed with a bit of disbelief. The accounts of his wealth, particularly his gold, were almost too extravagant to believe. Historians from Europe, hearing the tales of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage and the gold that was spread across Cairo, could scarcely comprehend the scale of his wealth. Some accounts described entire streets lined with gold that Mansa Musa so freely gave away to the poor, to the scholars, to the merchants along his journey. These stories, while often exaggerated, added to the myth of Mansa Musa as a king of unmatched wealth. Yet, as the years passed and Mali's influence waned, these stories continued to circulate. The legend of Mansa Musa would serve as a kind of benchmark in the world's understanding of wealth, much like Alexander the Great's empire became a measure of power and military might. Mansa Musa's name, tied so tightly to gold, would come to symbolize the excesses of empire, but also the potential for greatness that wealth, if used wisely, could bring. However, while his name would remain synonymous with riches, the reality of his reign was more complex. In the wake of his death, Mali's fortunes began to shift. His successors, lacking his vision and leadership, struggled to maintain the cohesion of the empire. The internal divisions grew as local rulers sought more power, and the once unified Mali Empire began to splinter. The gold that had once flowed so freely was no longer enough to keep the empire together. The empire's dependence on its wealth, without a strong foundation in political stability, eventually led to its fragmentation. It's fascinating to think about how Mansa Musa's reign would be viewed today if he had managed to extend his legacy and influence beyond the reach of his wealth. The Mali Empire, under his rule, had reached the pinnacle of its power, but it had always been precariously perched on the edge of vulnerability. As wealth poured in, so too did the challenges of governing such an expansive empire. The concentration of wealth, as much as it brought prosperity, also made the empire vulnerable to economic shocks. Gold, once a symbol of Mali's strength, became a double-edged sword. The eventual rise of the Songhai Empire, which would take over as the dominant power in West Africa, underscored the transient nature of empire building. Songhai, with its more centralized control and its own vast wealth, managed to absorb many of Mali's territories. It's possible that if Mansa Musa had reigned longer, or if he had prepared his empire for the inevitable changes of time, the Mali Empire might have lasted longer. Historians are still divided over how much Mansa Musa's policies contributed to the eventual decline of Mali, but the empire's fall was, in many ways, a natural result of the forces of history. Even so, Mansa Musa's legacy continued to inspire. His story would be told for centuries, not only in the annals of African history but also in the histories of the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Europe. The tales of his wealth, his generosity, and his leadership inspired countless other rulers to dream of what was possible through wealth and ambition. Mansa Musa's name became a symbol of what could be achieved with vision, leadership, and, of course, gold. Today, Mansa Musa's story is more than just the tale of a rich king. It is a story about ambition, vision, and the complexities of ruling an empire. His legacy serves as a reminder of the fragile nature of power and the importance of securing the future through a balance of wealth, leadership, and stability. And as we look back on his reign, we can't help but wonder, how much could Mansa Musa have achieved if he had been able to overcome the challenges that eventually led to the decline of the Mali Empire? As we continue to unravel the story of Mansa Musa, it's impossible to ignore the remarkable duality that defined his reign: wealth and wisdom, grandeur and fragility. His reign symbolized the best of what could be achieved through leadership, vision and wealth, yet also highlighted the inherent challenges of maintaining such an empire. It's a story of excess and cultural flourishing intertwined with the growing complexities of power. When we consider the decline of the Mali Empire, there's a fascinating tension between Mansa Musa's enormous wealth and the eventual vulnerability of the empire. Gold, the very foundation of his wealth, became a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed him to foster the development of infrastructure, culture and education, creating a vibrant and prosperous society. On the other hand, the sudden inflation and economic instability caused by the devaluation of gold in the wake of Musa's legendary display of wealth would ultimately contribute to Mali's downfall. Historians continue to debate how much Mansa Musa's overexposure of his wealth contributed to this instability, with some arguing that the empire's reliance on gold made it vulnerable to fluctuations in value and trade routes. What makes Mansa Musa's story even more compelling is the way it transcends mere financial history. His reign wasn't just about gold. It was about shaping a culture, an intellectual movement, and a region. His patronage of Timbuktu's universities and libraries created a legacy of knowledge that would influence generations. His investment in architecture and infrastructure left a tangible mark on the cities of Mali, many of which still stand as symbols of his ambition. But the very ambition that allowed Musa to create such a lasting legacy also set the stage for the cracks that would later appear. In examining Mansa Musa's legacy, we must ask ourselves, what is the true measure of a ruler? Is it the wealth they amass or the wisdom they leave behind? For Mansa Musa, wealth and wisdom were intertwined. His financial resources allowed him to bring scholars and artists from across the world to Mali, fostering an environment where knowledge could flourish. Yet, as history has shown, wealth alone does not guarantee the sustainability of an empire. It's the careful balance between political stability, economic management, and cultural development that sustains a lasting legacy. While Mali was in decline, the influence of Mansa Musa's reign was not quickly forgotten. The intellectual movement he helped foster in Timbuktu continued to reverberate long after his death. His name continued to inspire scholars, poets, and rulers. Even as other empires rose and fell, the story of Mansa Musa's wealth and his patronage of culture remained a guiding light for those seeking to understand the potential of leadership. Yet, for all of Mansa Musa's successes, there was an undeniable tension between his wealth and the empire's eventual collapse. While his wealth made him a powerful force in the world, it also led to some of the vulnerabilities that his successors struggled to overcome. His successors, often less competent than Musa himself, failed to maintain the vast empire, and the empire fractured under the weight of internal conflict and external threats. Despite this, the memory of Mansa Musa lived on in the tales told about him, becoming a symbol of what was possible when wealth, ambition, and leadership came together. Mansa Musa's empire, for all its glory, serves as a reminder of the fragile nature of power. Even the wealthiest and most powerful empires are subject to the whims of time, internal discord, and changing external circumstances. The Mali Empire, once a dominant force in West Africa, eventually succumbed to these pressures. Yet Mansa Musa's name endures not just because of the wealth he amassed, but because of his contributions to education, culture, and the intellectual growth of his empire. As we look at the broader picture, we see that Mansa Musa's reign represents both the heights of human achievement and the inherent fragility of greatness. His gold, his buildings, his libraries, these are lasting symbols of his rule. But his reign also serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that wealth, power, and glory can be fleeting, and that the true strength of a ruler lies not in the wealth they accumulate, but in the legacy they leave behind. Mansa Musa's story is a complex one. It's a story of riches but also of wisdom. It's a story of an empire that rose to unimaginable heights but ultimately fell to the weight of its own ambitions. And it's a story of a king who, through wealth and vision, transformed his world, but couldn't escape the inevitable forces of time and history. Mansa Musa's reign may have ended with the decline of the Mali Empire, but his legacy is far from forgotten. His story continues to captivate people today, reminding us of the potential of human ambition and the complex dynamics of power. As we reflect on his life and his reign, we're left with one enduring question. What would the world look like today if Mansa Musa's empire had survived, and if his vision had been carried forward by future generations? As we approach the later stages of Mansa Musa's story, it becomes apparent that his reign wasn't just about the wealth he accumulated or the empire he built. It was also about the profound influence he had on the world. His life is a reminder that history isn't shaped by wealth alone, but by the decisions, leadership, and foresight of those who wield it. Mansa Musa's impact went far beyond his gold, transcending into realms of culture, education, diplomacy, and legacy. One of the greatest achievements of Mansa Musa was the way he transformed Mali into a hub of learning and scholarship. It's easy to think of an empire's wealth and power in terms of material riches, but Mansa Musa understood that true greatness lies in the enrichment of the mind and spirit. While his vast fortune allowed him to sponsor monumental projects and make grand gestures, it was his investment in education and the arts that solidified Mali's place in history. The city of Timbuktu in particular flourished under his patronage. Once a small town, it became the intellectual heart of the empire, attracting scholars, writers, and thinkers from all over the Muslim world. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu became one of the most important centers of learning in Africa and the wider Islamic world. It was here that scholars would preserve ancient texts and contribute new works in a variety of fields, including astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and mathematics. The libraries of Timbuktu housed tens of thousands of manuscripts, many of which were written in Arabic and covered a vast array of subjects. These manuscripts didn't just serve as repositories of knowledge. They represented the cultural and intellectual legacy of a king who recognized that the wealth of a nation isn't just measured in gold, but in the ideas and knowledge it fosters. Mansa Musa's commitment to education had a lasting impact. He established schools, libraries, and mosques throughout his empire, creating a network of intellectual and religious centers that would continue to influence generations of scholars and leaders. Timbuktu, in particular, became a place where knowledge was shared and preserved, ensuring that the legacy of the Mali Empire would survive long after its physical decline. While Mansa Musa's reign was marked by his patronage of the arts and intellectual pursuits, it was also a period of significant economic transformation. His wealth, derived largely from gold and salt, fueled the expansion of trade and commerce across the Sahara Desert. Mansa Musa's empire controlled some of the most lucrative trade routes in the world, facilitating the exchange of goods, culture, and ideas between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. His ability to manage such an expansive empire, while fostering a thriving economy, was a testament to his leadership and vision. However, the same wealth that helped to build Mali into a powerhouse was also one of the factors that led to its eventual decline. As we've seen, the influx of gold into the economy led to inflation and devaluation, and the empire's over-reliance on its natural resources created vulnerabilities. The political fragmentation that followed Mansa Musa's death further weakened the empire. His successors, while capable, lacked the same visionary leadership and charisma that had defined his reign. In many ways, the decline of the Mali Empire can be traced to the inability of later rulers to maintain the delicate balance of wealth, power, and stability that Mansa Musa had achieved. Mansa Musa's death in 1337 marked the end of an era, but it didn't mark the end of his influence. Even as the Mali Empire began to weaken, Mansa Musa's legacy endured. The legend of his wealth and generosity continued to inspire rulers and scholars for centuries. His pilgrimage to Mecca, which was both a religious journey and a display of wealth, remained a defining moment in his life. The images of gold and wealth that surrounded his journey became part of the mythology surrounding him, and his name would go on to symbolize the possibility of greatness through leadership and vision. Yet even in death, Mansa Musa's empire couldn't maintain the glory of its peak. The empire's eventual collapse wasn't an immediate result of his death, but rather a slow process that unfolded over the decades following his passing. The Songhai Empire, which had been a rival to Mali during Musa's reign, eventually eclipsed the Mali Empire and became the dominant force in West Africa. The Moroccan invasion of 1591, which led to the fall of Timbuktu, marked the final end of Mali's golden age. However, even as Mali's power waned, the intellectual and cultural contributions of Mansa Musa's reign continued to influence the region and the wider world. Today, the legacy of Mansa Musa lives on, not just in the gold that he left behind, but in the cultural, intellectual, and architectural contributions that shaped West Africa. His patronage of education and the arts ensured that Mali's place in history would be remembered, even as its political power diminished. Mansa Musa's reign, with all its contradictions and complexities, serves as a reminder that wealth, power, and greatness are fleeting, but the impact of a visionary leader can echo through time. As we reflect on Mansa Musa's reign, it's clear that his story is one of ambition, vision, and the pursuit of greatness. His empire may have eventually fallen, but his legacy endures in the ideas, institutions, and cultural contributions that he left behind. Mansa Musa remains a figure whose wealth and influence reshaped the world, leaving a mark on history that will never be forgotten. As we continue to reflect on Mansa Musa's legacy, it's important to understand how his reign was not only a high point for Mali but also a pivotal moment in the history of Africa and the world. His empire, at its zenith, was more than just a political or economic entity, it was a beacon of cultural, intellectual, and religious achievement. In a time when many parts of the world were experiencing political instability, Mansa Musa's Mali Empire stood as a shining example of what could be accomplished through visionary leadership. Let's pause for a moment and think about how Mansa Musa's reign affected not just Africa but also the larger global picture. As the Mali Empire became more prosperous, it began to interact with world powers beyond Africa. Through trade and diplomacy, Mansa Musa built connections with the Islamic world, reaching from North Africa into the Middle East and Europe. His pilgrimage to Mecca, while a deeply personal religious journey, was also a strategic diplomatic move that served to enhance the reputation of Mali. The lavish gifts he distributed on his journey, including vast amounts of gold, acted as both a statement of wealth and a sign of goodwill towards the broader Muslim world. In Europe, Mansa Musa's name began to circulate, though it was often shrouded in myth. As word of his wealth spread across the Mediterranean, the story of the King of Gold caught the attention of explorers, merchants, and even rulers in Europe. The legend of Mansa Musa continued to grow, and many began to look to Africa as a land of immense riches. His gold, which had helped Mali dominate the trans-Saharan trade routes, was a symbol of wealth that captured the imagination of the outside world. For centuries, Mansa Musa's story would fuel both European fantasies and real-world exploration into the heart of Africa. But while his wealth was legendary, it's essential to recognize that Mansa Musa's reign was not solely defined by material wealth. His contributions to the intellectual and cultural life of Mali were just as monumental as his financial achievements. The development of Timbuktu as a center of learning and culture stands as a testament to his foresight and vision. Under his patronage, Timbuktu became a thriving hub for scholars, artists, and religious leaders. The city was home to a remarkable library of ancient manuscripts, many of which were written in Arabic and covered a wide range of subjects, from astronomy and mathematics to history and law. These manuscripts are considered one of Africa's greatest intellectual treasures, and their preservation has allowed future generations to learn from the rich cultural and intellectual traditions of the Mali Empire. Mansa Musa's investment in education wasn't just about creating an environment for scholars to thrive, it was about building a lasting cultural infrastructure that would impact generations to come. The libraries, universities, and mosques that sprang up during his reign became symbols of Mali's dedication to learning, science, and intellectual advancement. His empire's educational institutions were instrumental in preserving and advancing Islamic knowledge, much of which would later influence Europe during the Renaissance. As much as Mansa Musa's reign was marked by intellectual and cultural flourishing, it was also defined by a period of incredible economic power. The gold mines of Mali made the empire one of the wealthiest states in the world at the time, and Mansa Musa's control of the gold trade ensured that Mali's riches flowed freely through the veins of the empire. However, it's also important to acknowledge that the gold that sustained Mali's wealth also brought with it certain challenges. One of the major drawbacks of the vast wealth generated by the gold trade was the inflationary pressure it created. When Mansa Musa's caravan passed through Egypt during his pilgrimage, the sheer quantity of gold he distributed caused the value of gold to plummet in the regions surrounding the empire. This episode in Mali's history is often cited by economists as an example of how an empire's over-reliance on a single commodity, especially something as volatile as gold, can destabilize an economy in the long run. Despite these challenges, Mansa Musa's rule remained a shining example of what could be achieved with visionary leadership and effective governance. His empire's wealth allowed for the creation of grand infrastructure projects that benefited his people. Roads were built, irrigation systems were established, and impressive architectural monuments were constructed throughout Mali, solidifying his reign as one of the most prosperous and influential periods in West African history. Yet, despite the splendor of his empire, the forces of time eventually caught up with Mansa Musa's legacy. The decline of Mali after his death was marked by a series of internal and external factors. The empire's vast size made it difficult to govern, and the wealth that had once brought prosperity began to be seen as a liability. As trade routes shifted, external pressures from neighboring empires, and internal political instability grew, Mali's once unified empire slowly began to fragment. The rise of the Songhai Empire, located to the east of Mali, was one of the key factors in the weakening of Mansa Musa's empire. Songhai's military power and centralized leadership eventually outpaced Mali, and by the late 15th century, the Songhai Empire would rise to prominence, absorbing much of Mali's former territory. While the fall of the Mali Empire was inevitable, the legacy of Mansa Musa remained. His story continued to be told for centuries, inspiring future rulers, scholars, and leaders. His name became synonymous with wealth and generosity, and his reign would forever be remembered as one of the most remarkable in African history. Today, Mansa Musa's influence is still felt. His legacy as a patron of education, culture, and commerce continues to be celebrated in Mali, where he is revered as one of the greatest rulers in the history of the region. His commitment to intellectual and cultural growth laid the foundations for the continued flourishing of African civilizations, and his wealth remains a symbol of what can be achieved when leadership, vision, and resources come together. Mansa Musa's reign may have ended, but the lessons of his rule endure, reminding us that wealth, while a powerful tool, is only one part of a ruler's legacy. True greatness lies not in the gold that is accumulated, but in the ways it is used to build a better world for future generations. As we come closer to the end of Mansa Musa's incredible story, we can't help but marvel at the lasting impact his reign had on both Africa and the world. His empire, built on gold, was more than just a reflection of his wealth. It was a testament to his ability to see beyond material riches and create a lasting legacy rooted in culture, knowledge, and the flourishing of intellectual pursuits. His reign was an epoch in history, a time when wealth didn't just accumulate in coffers but spread into the development of society, influencing education, religion, and commerce across regions. Yet, as with all empires, the downfall of the Mali Empire after Mansa Musa's death reminds us that no empire is immune to the forces of time and change. As we discussed earlier, his empire's reliance on gold became a burden. The instability caused by the devaluation of gold after his lavish pilgrimage, combined with the internal divisions among his successors, eventually led to the empire's fragmentation. The very wealth that once made Mali a powerhouse started to erode its foundation, with no strong leadership or cohesive vision to hold the empire together after Mansa Musa's death. But it is important to recognize that the collapse of the Mali Empire did not erase the influence of Mansa Musa. Even as the empire weakened and other powers like Songhai rose to prominence, the cultural and intellectual legacy Musa had cultivated endured. Timbuktu, Mali's greatest center of learning, continued to attract scholars and intellectuals for centuries. The manuscripts written during his reign, many of which still exist today, are a testament to the intellectual revolution he championed. Mansa Musa's influence wasn't just felt in West Africa. His legacy stretched across continents. European and Middle Eastern scholars, traders, and explorers heard of his wealth and the intellectual wonders of Timbuktu. The myths surrounding Mansa Musa, though often exaggerated, spread far beyond Africa. His legendary pilgrimage to Mecca and the stories of his generosity shaped the imagination of distant lands. For centuries, Mali and Mansa Musa's name remained synonymous with prosperity, power, and the pursuit of knowledge. But even though the grand empire he built has long since faded, we must ask ourselves, what can we learn from Mansa Musa's reign? What does his life teach us about the role of wealth in shaping a ruler's legacy? Perhaps the most important lesson we can take away is that wealth alone does not guarantee lasting success. While Mansa Musa's riches propelled his empire to greatness, it was his ability to invest in education, culture, and infrastructure that ensured his legacy would be felt long after his empire had fallen. His reign was a reminder that the true power of wealth lies in how it is used. Mansa Musa didn't just hoard his riches, he shared them. He used them to build schools, libraries, and mosques, creating a cultural and intellectual foundation for future generations. His patronage of learning transformed Mali into a cultural and academic hub, and his support of the arts allowed the empire to thrive in a way that went beyond mere material wealth. This is where Mansa Musa's legacy shines brightest. His investment in education, culture, and intellectual life shows that a ruler's true wealth comes not just from what they own, but from what they give to their people. He understood that knowledge, art, and culture are lasting assets that, once cultivated, can transcend the limitations of time and circumstance. Today, Mali's cultural contributions, especially those related to the knowledge preserved in Timbuktu, remain an invaluable part of human history. Yet, the end of the Mali Empire also teaches us about the fragility of power. Empires rise and fall, and while Mansa Musa's wealth and generosity made him a legend, they were not enough to sustain the empire after his death. As the world changes and new powers rise, even the most impressive empires can be brought low. It is a reminder that leadership must be dynamic, constantly evolving to adapt to the forces of change. Mansa Musa's story, with all its grandeur and eventual decline, is one of the most compelling in world history. It serves as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. His reign reminds us that true greatness lies not just in accumulating wealth, but in using that wealth to build a legacy that lasts. It's a story about ambition, vision, and the complexity of maintaining power in an ever-changing world. His golden age may have ended, but the ideas, culture, and knowledge he fostered continue to resonate today. Today, as we reflect on Mansa Musa's legacy, we are reminded of the impact a visionary leader can have on the world. His story transcends the boundaries of time, continuing to inspire not only those who study his empire but anyone who believes in the power of leadership to create lasting change. Mansa Musa's reign, for all its complexity, remains a shining example of what can be achieved when wealth, wisdom, and vision are used to uplift a nation and its people. As we reach the final stretch of Mansa Musa's story, it's impossible not to feel the weight of his legacy, both the brilliance and the complexities that came with ruling such an immense empire. His story, as a ruler of untold wealth, who used that wealth to invest in education, culture, and the development of his people, continues to serve as a beacon for those in positions of power. It is a reminder that the true measure of leadership is not just what one accumulates, but what one gives back to the world and how one shapes the future for the generations to come. In this final reflection, let's zoom in on the lasting impact Mansa Musa had on the perception of African wealth and civilization. While the story of Mansa Musa's wealth is well known, it has often been wrapped in myth and legend, with exaggerated tales of his gold and riches overshadowing the deeper contributions he made to society. It's vital to pull back the layers of exaggeration and look closely at the substance of his reign, the way in which Mansa Musa balanced cultural flourishing with economic might. Mansa Musa's empire wasn't just a site of wealth, it was also a melting pot of diverse peoples and cultures, contributing to a vibrant, dynamic society that fostered innovation in various fields. His ability to attract scholars from around the Islamic world to Mali elevated his empire into a global hub of knowledge. Timbuktu, for example, was not just a trade city, it was a center where intellectuals engaged in important debates about everything from astronomy to law, where texts were written and preserved that would otherwise have been lost to history. This intellectual legacy has been largely overshadowed by the overwhelming narratives of his gold, yet it stands as a testament to his commitment to knowledge and his vision of what Mali could become. Mansa Musa's ability to blend the material with the intellectual is what set him apart. He didn't just concentrate his wealth in his own hands, he invested it in the lasting infrastructure of his empire. The libraries, mosques, and schools he helped fund were not only symbols of religious devotion but also pillars that upheld the very structure of his society. These institutions were the backbone of Mali's cultural dominance in the region, ensuring that the country's intellectual life could thrive long after his reign had ended. The impact of Mansa Musa's reign on the broader African continent cannot be understated. While many empires and kingdoms rose and fell during this period, none had the same combination of wealth and intellectual vigor that Mansa Musa cultivated in Mali. Even though the empire weakened after his death, the cultural and intellectual legacies he left behind continued to influence African kingdoms for centuries. The influence of the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa would eventually reverberate throughout the entire African continent, affecting trade, religion, and education. Yet, even as we acknowledge Mansa Musa's extraordinary contributions, we must also recognize the complexity of his legacy. The economic strain placed on Mali by over-reliance on gold, the political fragmentation that followed his death, and the eventual invasion by Morocco were all elements that contributed to the decline of the Mali Empire. These challenges remind us that even the greatest leaders are subject to the changing tides of history, and no empire, no matter how prosperous, can maintain its dominance forever. Still, there is a lesson in that. The rise and fall of Mansa Musa's empire emphasized the fleeting nature of power and the importance of sustainable governance. While Mansa Musa's empire reached extraordinary heights, the inability of his successors to adapt to the changing world around them contributed to its eventual collapse. It's a powerful reminder of the importance of leadership continuity and adaptation in the face of external challenges. As we approach the final moments of Mansa Musa's story, we must ask, what is the enduring lesson of his reign? For Mansa Musa, the key to his success was not simply the wealth he accumulated, but how he used that wealth to build an empire that could withstand time. He set a blueprint for future generations, showing how wealth could be a tool for cultural and intellectual progress. His reign exemplifies the idea that true greatness lies not in amassing resources for oneself but in using those resources to improve the lives of others and to shape a legacy that will endure long after you're gone. In conclusion, Mansa Musa's life and reign are a testament to what can be achieved through vision, leadership, and generosity. His wealth, though legendary, was just one facet of his rule. His true legacy lies in the institutions he built, the culture he nurtured, and the generations of scholars and intellectuals he inspired. The story of Mansa Musa is one of triumph and tragedy, wealth and wisdom, power and vulnerability. It reminds us that wealth may be fleeting, but the impact of a great leader can last through the ages. As we reflect on his extraordinary life, let us also remember that Mansa Musa's story is not just a tale of gold, but a story of what it means to lead with purpose, to build with foresight, and to use wealth not just to enrich oneself, but to enrich the world around us. The Mali Empire may have faded, but the lessons Mansa Musa left behind, lessons of culture, wisdom and generosity, continue to echo through history. As you move deeper into the narrative of Mansa Musa's life, the story begins to take on a more mysterious and contemplative tone. Even centuries later, historians still argue about the exact circumstances surrounding his death. There is no definitive account, leaving room for speculation and scholarly debate. Was it natural causes? Was it the result of overexertion after decades of ruling and traveling? Or perhaps, some suggest with a wink, the stress of managing such unimaginable wealth finally caught up with him. Whatever the truth, the end of Mansa Musa's life marks both a conclusion and a turning point for the Mali Empire. Imagine yourself walking through the golden streets of Timbuktu one final time, watching the sun glint off the domes of mosques and the gold that still lingered in the market squares. You can almost hear the faint echoes of scholars debating in the library, merchants calling out their wares, and the soft footsteps of citizens going about their lives. This was an empire that had thrived under a ruler who balanced generosity, intellect and power with almost poetic precision. Mansa Musa's death left a vacuum that no single individual could easily fill. The empire, while still vast and resource-rich, lacked the unifying vision that had guided it under Musa's reign. His descendants inherited enormous wealth and prestige, but leadership is more than inheritance. It requires skill, foresight, and the ability to inspire loyalty, qualities that were difficult to replicate. Historians still debate whether the empire's decline would have been inevitable even if Musa had lived longer, suggesting that empires built on extraordinary wealth often face fragility once the original visionary passes. One quirky anecdote that survives from the period involves the way Mansa Musa's funeral reportedly proceeded. Some accounts suggest that he was buried with a portion of his gold, a final testament to his wealth and status. Whether literal or symbolic, this gesture underscored the extent to which wealth was intertwined with identity, status, and legacy in the Mali Empire. It also reminds us that the wealth he accumulated was not simply for indulgence. It was part of the cultural and religious fabric of his reign. Even after his passing, Mansa Musa's influence did not vanish. His reign had set a benchmark for leadership and opulence that rulers and scholars would continue to reference for centuries. His Hajj, the generosity he displayed, and the institutions he founded became legendary tales, influencing not only African history but global perception of wealth, leadership, and the African continent itself. Historians still argue about the scale of his riches and the exact impact of his generosity, but one fact remains undeniable. Mansa Musa's life was extraordinary. And yet, beneath all this gold and grandeur, there is a human story. A man who navigated the pressures of ruling an empire, the responsibilities of faith, and the expectations of history. The wealth he commanded was staggering, but it also carried weight. The responsibility to his people, to his empire, and to the legacy he would leave behind. Even in death, Mansa Musa's presence was felt, a constant reminder of the potential for one individual to shape an entire civilization. In reflecting on his mysterious end, we also consider the lessons of his life. Wealth, while powerful, is fleeting without vision. Generosity, while admirable, can have unintended consequences. Leadership, while celebrated, must be matched with careful succession planning. Mansa Musa's story is not only about riches, it is about balance, foresight, and the delicate art of creating a legacy that endures beyond one lifetime. Now, as you continue to drift through the annals of history, it's impossible not to grapple with the myth of Mansa Musa's wealth. Did he truly possess the riches that so many accounts describe, or have the stories been embellished over time? Scholars still debate the scale of his fortune, and the truth is likely somewhere between legend and reality. But whether exact numbers are known or not, the perception of his wealth had profound consequences, shaping Mali's influence and how the world viewed Africa. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the journey again. The endless caravan of camels laden with gold, the city streets of Cairo overflowing with treasure, the awestruck faces of local merchants and rulers. Even if the details are slightly exaggerated, The image serves to communicate a deeper truth about Mansa Musa's power and the impact of his reign. The myths themselves became tools that projected Mali's strength across continents, cementing Musa's place in global history. One of the most fascinating aspects of this myth-making is how it intersected with geography and mapping. European cartographers in the 14th and 15th centuries often depicted Mali on maps as a land of immense wealth, with Mansa Musa portrayed as the ruler of a kingdom overflowing with gold. These depictions, though influenced by hearsay, helped to shape perceptions of West Africa in the European imagination. Historians still argue about how much these maps influenced subsequent European exploration, but there's no doubt that Musa's legend played a role in putting Africa on the medieval map, literally and figuratively. And yet, the myth of Mansa Musa's wealth isn't just about fame, it's also a lesson in human psychology and storytelling. Wealth on this scale is almost incomprehensible even today. By framing Musa's fortune in terms of extravagant imagery and astonishing anecdotes, chroniclers ensured that his story would be remembered and retold for centuries. There's a certain magic in the way history blends fact and imagination, especially when it comes to someone as extraordinary as Mansa Musa. Musa's wealth also had a tangible effect on his contemporaries. The sudden influx of gold into local economies during his pilgrimage and visits to neighboring regions caused inflation, as we've mentioned before. Historians still debate whether Musa understood the full consequences of this generosity, but it's clear that his actions reshaped economies, sometimes in ways that outlasted his reign. Gold, while a source of influence, also proved to be a double-edged sword, capable of destabilizing even the most prosperous cities. Beyond the economics, the myth of Mansa Musa's wealth served to inspire a cultural memory. His life became a symbol of the heights of African civilization, a counter-narrative to the often limited portrayals of the continent in historical records. Through his generosity, pilgrimage, and diplomacy, Musa crafted a legacy that was both concrete and symbolic, leaving future generations with a story of what African leadership could achieve. In this way, the myth itself became part of Mansa Musa's power. Wealth isn't only about coins or gold, it's about perception, influence, and the stories that survive the passage of time. Mansa Musa's legend demonstrates that the true measure of wealth is not merely what you possess, but how it shapes the world around you and the legacy you leave behind. And so, as you float through these historical reflections, it becomes evident that Mansa Musa's life is more than a story of riches. It is a study in influence, legacy, and the power of perception. The blend of fact, myth, and interpretation surrounding his life continues to captivate historians, storytellers, and dreamers alike. As you near the final chapters of Mansa Musa's story, it's time to reflect on what his life means today. Beyond the gold, the caravans, and the grand architecture, his reign offers lessons that resonate across centuries. You probably won't realize it immediately, but the echoes of Mansa Musa's decisions are still visible in modern discussions about wealth, leadership, and cultural influence. His life is a reminder that material riches, while impressive, are only part of the equation. It's how you use them that defines your impact. Imagine Mali today, the remnants of ancient mosques, the whispers of long-lost libraries, and the streets that once bustled with scholars and merchants. The physical wealth may have diminished, but the intellectual and cultural infrastructure Mansa Musa built continues to inspire. Modern leaders, educators, and entrepreneurs can still learn from his vision, how to leverage resources to promote learning, stability, and influence beyond borders. Historians still argue whether the greatest legacy of Mansa Musa was his wealth or his vision. Some insist that the gold, tangible and awe-inspiring, is what secured his place in history. Others contend that the true mark of greatness lies in the intellectual and cultural flourishing he fostered. Perhaps the answer is both. His wealth enabled his vision, and his vision elevated his wealth into a lasting legacy. One of the more quirky yet illuminating aspects of his story is how it challenges contemporary perceptions of African history. For centuries, narratives of African civilizations were underrepresented in global histories, but Mansa Musa's life disrupts that misconception. He embodies a chapter of Africa's past where wealth, intellect, and diplomacy intersected in ways that rivaled any empire of Europe or the Middle East. Even today, African historians and global scholars look to his reign as a beacon of what was possible. Mansa Musa's story also speaks to the power of imagination. The tales of his pilgrimage, the legendary caravans, and the mountains of gold encourage us to think beyond the mundane and consider what leadership, vision, and generosity can achieve when applied at a monumental scale. And while some details are debated, the essence of the story, the transformative impact of one extraordinary individual, is indisputable. In our modern context, Mansa Musa inspires both curiosity and reflection. For anyone fascinated by economics, diplomacy, or culture, his life offers a blueprint for understanding the interplay between wealth, power, and societal development. For dreamers and storytellers, it's a reminder that legends are born not just from what you possess, but from how you leave your mark on the world. So, as you settle further into the soothing cadence of this story, allow yourself to ponder the subtle lessons hidden within the grandeur. Mansa Musa's wealth was spectacular, yes, but his foresight, generosity, and cultivation of knowledge transformed that wealth into something far more enduring, a legacy that still whispers through the centuries. Mansa Musa's story also speaks to the power of imagination. The tales of his pilgrimage, the legendary caravans, and the mountains of gold encourage us to think beyond the mundane and consider what leadership, vision, and generosity can achieve when applied at a monumental scale. And while some details are debated, the essence of the story, the transformative impact of one extraordinary individual, is indisputable. In our modern context, Mansa Musa inspires both curiosity and reflection. For anyone fascinated by economics, diplomacy, or culture, his life offers a blueprint for understanding the interplay between wealth, power, and societal development. For dreamers and storytellers, it's a reminder that legends are born not just from what you possess, but from how you leave your mark on the world. So, as you settle further into the soothing cadence of this story, allow yourself to ponder the subtle lessons hidden within the grandeur. Mansa Musa's wealth was spectacular, yes, but his foresight, generosity, and cultivation of knowledge transformed that wealth into something far more enduring, a legacy that still whispers through the centuries. Finally, as we approach the end of this long journey through Mansa Musa's life, it's time to slowly reflect and let the story settle in. You've walked beside him through Timbuktu, witnessed the dazzling caravans of gold, marveled at the grand mosques and libraries, and felt the weight of an empire that rose to such heights it left the world in awe. And now, as the sands of time shift gently beneath your feet, you begin to understand that Mansa Musa's life is a meditation on wealth, vision, and legacy. The Mali Empire, at its height, was not merely a collection of territories, it was a network of ideas, trade, and cultural achievements bound together by the foresight and generosity of a singular ruler. Mansa Musa's gold, while legendary, was only a part of the story. His real treasure was the way he shaped minds, inspired scholarship, and connected people across vast distances. His pilgrimage to Mecca was not just a religious duty but a demonstration of how wealth, faith, and influence could intersect to create a global footprint. Historians still argue about the precise details. The exact amount of gold he carried, the exact scale of the caravans, and the exact impact on the regions he passed through. But the broader truths are undeniable. Mansa Musa changed the perception of Africa in the medieval world, challenged assumptions about leadership and wealth, and left an indelible mark on history that echoes into modern times. Even today, when we talk about the richest people in history, his name appears as a benchmark, a figure so extraordinary that mere numbers cannot capture his influence. Consider the human aspect for a moment. Mansa Musa was not infallible. His generosity sometimes destabilized economies, and his empire struggled to maintain its cohesion after his death. Yet, these imperfections make his story all the more relatable and instructive. They remind us that greatness is rarely without complexity and that even the most powerful figures face challenges that money alone cannot solve. The lessons embedded in his life are timeless. Wealth without vision can be fleeting, and influence without foresight can unravel quickly. Now, as you lie back and let your mind wander, picture the golden hues of Timbuktu fading into the quiet night. Imagine the scholars poring over manuscripts by candlelight, the bustling marketplaces slowly emptying, and the legacy of Mansa Musa quietly settling into the foundations of history. His life was a grand narrative of human ambition, generosity, and vision, intertwined with the beauty and fragility of an empire built on both gold and wisdom. Take a deep breath and let the story sink in. You've traveled across centuries, walked beside one of history's richest men, and glimpsed the profound ways in which one life can shape countless others. Mansa Musa's wealth, while staggering, was only the vehicle for a far greater legacy: the cultivation of knowledge, the encouragement of culture, and the demonstration of what can be achieved when vision meets opportunity. Now, as the soft hum of history drifts away, remember the subtle lesson his life imparts. The greatest riches are often intangible: the influence, the wisdom, and the enduring impact on generations yet to come. Let these reflections settle in as you drift off, carrying the story of Mansa Musa into your dreams. Now, as the narrative softens and the details of Mansa Musa's life begin to fade into the quiet, Let your mind drift with gentle ease. Imagine the sun setting over the Mali Empire, painting Timbuktu and the surrounding lands in warm, golden hues. The camels have returned from the caravan, the streets of the city are hushed, and the glow from the mosque's lamps spills softly onto the sand. The scholars have closed their manuscripts, the merchants have packed away their goods, and the empire rests, carried forward in memory and legacy. Think of Mansa Musa not just as a ruler but as a human being, someone who bore incredible responsibility, made bold choices and left behind lessons that transcend wealth. His generosity, his vision, his devotion to education, culture, and diplomacy, all of these become whispers in your imagination, guiding you gently into reflection. Even the grandeur, the gold, and the vast scale of his empire become soft, luminous images, almost like stars fading as night falls. You probably won't remember every figure or caravan, and that's okay. The essence of Mansa Musa's story, the awe, the inspiration, and the delicate balance between ambition and legacy, is what matters. Let the magnitude of his achievements drift into your thoughts, not as burdens, but as gentle reminders of what one individual can influence across time. Feel the subtle echoes of Timbuktu's libraries, the quiet hum of the bustling markets, and the soft footsteps of history unfolding slowly around you. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and the story blends into the quiet hum of the night, rest assured that the riches of imagination, the wisdom of history, and the quiet lessons of a life well lived can accompany you into sleep. Let the world of Mansa Musa gently dissolve, leaving only calm, curiosity, and a soft, lingering sense of wonder.